the human dead. It seems like all the humans do is die, the high elf bard said, as he lifted a glass goblet of wine to his elegant lips. His audience, a group of wood elves, and a few of his fellow highborn kin, looked around uncomfortably. It wasn't a polite conversation, but they were deep in their cups, and there were only elves in this wine house. Wood elf settlements were officially open to humans, but their odd behavior and short lives made it uncomfortable for them to settle for long. I know we've all thought it once or twice. It's unkind to say it. And you're all taught by your tutors and craftmasters that it's gauche to mention their lack of longevity. He then smiled ruefully at his younger but no less youthful audience. And it is impolite, just as I could never move as quietly as you, my dear friends. All the many races have their advantages and disadvantages, etc., but that's not why we don't mention it. The wood elves looked at each other again, this time in confusion. We are told that ingenuity and ambition make humanity a force to be reckoned with, and that's true to a point. They have less time, so they use it better than us. But do you think that was enough for them to win a war with us? I was there, in the time before the long peace. Humans had just started showing up on our borders, and this was long before we started devoting ourselves to art and study. Yes, friends in the early days when we had just escaped the Fey wilds. We were just as warlike as any kobold raiding crew. We needed resources, we needed servants, and as we would not die of old age, we basically thought we could take what we wanted. I worked for raiders in those days. I was just a lad. I mostly cooked and carried the bags for my betters. The human settlement we were to sack had just been built recently. It has only been a village of any size for a dozen centuries or so, maybe less. Humans bred rapidly, but there were only a few hundred farmers and one mage in the area, and the larger cities were far off. Our party was 50 strong, and they were all battle-tested wormages, the type that could take a score of goblins each. Our magic was precise and deadly, and the humans had cultivated much in terms of resources, if not wealth. So it was deemed the perfect target. Now we all know human mages are impressive for how little time they have to study. Plus, they can add a few centuries to their usually paltry years through exposure to magic. So we stole into the graveyard at the edge of town where the mage had built his tower. He was the main threat to remove, and though we didn't know his specialty, we wanted to take him out quietly to avoid any unnecessary casualties. What type of mage was it? One of the high elves asked. His academic interest piqued. An unpleasant one, I'm afraid, and one that didn't occur to any of our kinsfolk at that time. We didn't have magic reachers yet, you see, Professor. Here, the bard took another fortifying sip of wine. This human's specialty was necromancy. The crowd shuddered. It wasn't a polite topic to raise, and it wasn't a concept that appealed to elven sensibilities. And here is why I say the human's ability to die is their greatest strength. Now, friends, you've no doubt visited human villages of similar size. Despite the years, they've kept much of their character. Have you ever seen one of their old graveyard towers or churches? The audience nodded. And what do they look like? Like the church or tower or whatever is sinking into the ground. One wood elf merchant volunteered. Yes, indeed, and that's what we assumed too. This tower looked like it had sunk 5 feet or so into the graveyard around it. Now, Do you understand why we were so foolish to attack the tower?" Only the professor nodded, his face turning a peculiar shade of gray-green. "I see the academic can do the required geometry." The bard smiled ruefully as he leaned into his audience, most of whom looked quite confused. "Well, Professor, what spell could a human wizard in such a situation cast that could be so devastating?" "Raise the fallen," the ashen-faced professor croaked out through his own wine glass as he took a hearty pull. "I don't understand," the other high elf in the audience said. "The village was about as large as this one, and that curse only raises the corpses in a defined area around the caster. I mean, surely they only had a few score graves to draw from, maybe as many as 300. If it had been there a long time, I've seen those graveyards, and they aren't vast catacombs. See, this is where our longevity weakens us. We think so little of dying, we don't have to deal with the logistics. We build grand tombs for our dead when they are killed in war or succumb to disease. But humans die all the time. Give them a few centuries, and even a little village of a few hundred will have a graveyard that looks like the buildings are sinking. They aren't sinking. The ground around it has risen. There weren't 400 or so corpses in the graveyard. There were over 4,000. 4,000 corpses, yes, but also the emotional pain and loss of each of those corpses' friends and family. Enough grief, sadness, and regret to fill all the poetry books of all the universities and all the realms. And that mage had been building and drawing from all that necromantic power for his entire life. The raiders had great warriors and could have taken any 10 undead without trouble. But the greatest warriors can't beat 100-to-1 odds with an obscenely powerful necromancer supporting them. The elegant mage lights in the tavern seemed to dim, and the bard's eyes unfocused. He fingered a scar on his left wrist. We were overwhelmed in seconds. I turned and fled and hid in the village well, trying to keep my tears from betraying me. The horde, once raised, rampaged for weeks, destroying our party, our greater army, and an entire elven city before they ran out of mana, and at last, deliquesced. The bard finished his wine, and then fixed the elves in his audience with the stare of a being that had seen civilizations rise and fall, and had learned humility. All the humans do is die, and we must pray they never realize it. Offers name and the links to original text in the description. If you enjoy the video, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to stay with us.